Welcome back to Karma's Ledger, where ordinary moments meet extraordinary consequences. Tonight begins a brand new set of 5 stories, each one pulled from the quiet corners of real life where choices echo louder than anyone expects. Some will make you smile, some will sting, and a few might stay with you long after the video ends. Before we dive in, if you enjoy stories that hold a mirror to human nature, stories where every action has a reckoning, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It helps the channel grow and lets us keep unearthing more of these karmic tales. Now let's begin with the first story, The Logan of the Departed. There are moments in life when technology meets humanity in the most uncomfortable ways, like when a voice on the other end of a support line says something you never expect to hear. It started as just another routine day for a service desk worker at an insurance firm, until a simple password reset call turned into something far stranger. Subscribe and like for more stories like this, each one a reminder that karma finds its way, even in the digital world. The man had been doing this job long enough to know that no 2 days were ever the same. Most calls were about forgotten passwords, locked accounts, or people too impatient to wait for the system to reboot. But this one started off with a woman's soft voice asking for help logging in. "Sure," he said, polite as ever. "May I have your username?" She gave it, and he typed it in without much thought, until the name blinked onto his screen. It was a man's name. At first, he assumed she was just calling on his behalf. "And your name, please?" he asked. "I'm his colleague," she said after a pause, her tone uneasy. Then she added the kind of sentence that freezes the air around you. "He passed away a few months ago." The words sat there between them like static. The agent felt his fingers still on the keyboard, unsure how to respond. It wasn't just awkward, it was against policy. Accounts belonged to living employees, not their replacements, not their partners, and definitely not the dead. But he stayed calm. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said gently, "but I'm afraid I can't let you use his account." He knew what came next. A protest, maybe anger, and he wasn't wrong. She explained that her team only had one active account for their entire branch, and this was it. Cutting it off would shut down their operations completely. She sounded desperate, not malicious. He wanted to help her, but procedure was procedure. Still, something in her voice, a mix of exhaustion and frustration, made him pause. He decided to consult with the security department before giving a firm no. When his colleague from security picked up, he recounted the story word for word. There was a silence on the other end, 7 long seconds that said more than any response could. "Wait," the security officer finally said. "You mean she's trying to log in using the credentials of someone who's deceased?" "That's right," the agent replied. He could almost hear the man shaking his head. The policy was clear. Once someone dies, their access must be terminated immediately. But the real problem wasn't just ethics. It was legal. Any misuse of a dead person's account could expose the company to serious penalties. The security officer sighed, checked the system, and confirmed that this account was the only active one for that branch. "We'll need to shut it down," he said. "But we can fast-track a new account if the director approves." The agent nodded. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. He switched back to the caller and tried to explain, choosing his words carefully, but before he could even finish, she exploded. "What do you mean I need the director's approval? He's out of the country for a week." Her voice cracked through the headset, high-pitched and panicked. The agent kept his tone steady, apologetic but firm. "I understand it's inconvenient," he said, "but it's our policy, and it protects your company too." She wasn't listening. Anger took over reason. She demanded to speak to a manager. The agent had seen this play out before, but this time he wasn't the only one on the line. Security was listening too. He transferred her through, warning them it might get heated. The officer on the other end laughed lightly. "Fine," he said. "My day could use some excitement." A week later, the agent got a message from the company's complaint department. The woman had filed a grievance against him, claiming he'd refused to help and cost her business time. But the investigator had already dismissed it. Policy was policy. The account stayed closed until the director returned, and within days of his arrival, new accounts were created for the entire team. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The problem could have been prevented months ago if the company had just planned ahead. Yet, that's how karma works. You neglect what should be done while there's time, and life finds a way to remind you later, often through the smallest inconvenience that grows into something bigger. The agent moved on to the next call, another name, another password. But the woman's voice stayed with him, not because of her anger, but because of what it revealed. In that brief moment of frustration and loss, he saw a reflection of something all too human: our refusal to let go, even of what's already gone. A week later, the agent sat at his desk sipping lukewarm coffee and clearing his queue when the name of that same company flashed again. For a second, he felt a pinch of déjà vu. The same branch, same domain, but this time a different name attached to the ticket. A man's voice came through, older and more composed. "Good morning," he said. "I'm the director of Havenfield Brokerage. I believe there was an issue with one of our accounts." The agent straightened, remembering the chaos of that earlier call. "Yes, sir," he replied. "The account in question belonged to your late employee. We had to suspend it." The director sighed deeply. "Yes, I heard. And I heard my associate gave you quite a time." His tone wasn't defensive, just tired. "I've been abroad dealing with her estate. The whole thing has been messy." The agent kept his words measured. "I understand, sir. We can set up new accounts for your team today. It just requires your approval." "Do it," the man said without hesitation. "Let's not drag ghosts into business anymore." The paperwork moved quickly. Within hours, the branch had fresh credentials, clean and compliant. The agent could have left it there, a routine resolution, but something about the director's tone made him curious. He couldn't shake the image of that woman's frantic voice from before, the desperation layered with something that sounded almost personal. As he closed out the ticket, he noticed a small internal note from HR attached to the deceased employee's profile. It read, "Account held confidential correspondence regarding pending claim investigation. Escalation complete." That was all. Nothing more. But it was enough to make him wonder if the woman had really been just another employee. A few days later, as quiet filled the office between calls, the security officer who'd helped him before rolled his chair over. "Remember that weird case with the dead man's account?" he asked, chewing on a pen. "Turns out there's more to it." The agent looked up. "Oh?" "Yeah. HR found out the woman who called wasn't actually listed as staff. She was his sister. He worked remotely, and she tried using his login to access pending commission payments. Probably figured no one would notice." The officer shook his head. "They caught it because she used her own company email to contact us sloppy." The agent sat back, letting that sink in. "So she lied, claimed to be a coworker." "Yep," the officer said. "And here's the kicker. She would have gotten away with it for a while if we hadn't locked that account immediately. Turns out her brother had been covering some shady deals under the company's insurance wing. The director's cleaning up the mess now." It was strange, hearing how grief and greed can mix so cleanly that you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. Maybe the sister didn't set out to cheat anyone. Maybe she just thought her brother's login held something she deserved. A remnant of the life he left behind. But the world doesn't forgive shortcuts, especially when they ride on someone else's identity. The agent didn't feel triumphant. If anything, he felt tired. The job was full of these small moral knots, and most days you just had to untie them without judging who tied them in the first place. Later that evening, as the office emptied, he stayed behind to finish one last report. The building hummed with the quiet rhythm of after-hours work, printers cooling, screens dimming, the faint buzz of fluorescent light. He found himself rereading the complaint email the woman had filed. It was full of anger and self-justification, claiming she'd been humiliated, delayed, disrespected. But buried in the middle was one line that stood out now. "You people forget there's a person behind every login." It hit harder than he expected. She was right. There was a person. There always is. Every ticket, Every password reset, every user on a screen was someone with a story. Messy, human, unpredictable. He shut his laptop, the glow fading from the screen, and leaned back in his chair. Outside, the city was winding down, streetlights flickering on, cars thinning out. He thought of that family somewhere across town, maybe still mourning, maybe still fighting over the small digital fragments a dead man left behind. Karma didn't strike like lightning, not always. Sometimes it just unfolded slowly, showing each person what they'd chosen, honesty or deceit, patience or control. In the end, the sister got nothing but a suspension notice from her brother's company and a warning from the police about unauthorized access. The director, on the other hand, ordered new systems to ensure every account had a contingency plan. The world adjusted itself, one quiet correction at a time. Weeks passed. The agent forgot about it until a small envelope arrived in the office mailroom with no return address. Inside was a folded note written in careful handwriting. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I just wanted to see his emails, to feel close to him again. Thank you for stopping me before I did something worse." No signature, but he didn't need one. He tucked the letter in his drawer without telling anyone. Some stories didn't belong in reports. Some were just meant to be understood in silence. From that day forward, whenever he heard someone on the line rushing, demanding, shouting to bypass a rule, he listened differently. He still enforced policy, still kept his tone steady. But somewhere inside, he remembered the sound of that woman's voice breaking when she said, "He passed away a few months ago." Behind every screen, a heartbeat. Behind every rule, a reason. Behind every act, a ripple that keeps moving long after the call ends. And so the ledger stayed balanced in its own quiet way. A woman forced to face her grief, a company forced to clean its house, and a man at a service desk reminded that compassion and compliance aren't enemies after all. In the end, karma didn't punish anyone here. It just held up a mirror and waited for them to look. Now moving towards the second story, one that shows how stubbornness can turn a simple task into a storm no one asked for. This one isn't about greed or deceit, but the quiet arrogance that hides behind the words, "I know what I'm doing." Before we begin, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this series. 5 stories where karma doesn't shout, it just waits. The tale begins inside a government IT office, the kind of place where the walls hum with fluorescent light and the air smells faintly of burnt coffee and tired patients. The technician on the line had seen it all. Lost headsets, tangled cables, passwords that refused to behave. But this time, the problem came wrapped in confidence and confusion. A woman from another department had filed a ticket demanding changes to their call routing system. A massive overhaul of phone lines, menus, and automated greetings. Nothing simple. Still, the technician thought, no problem. He rolled up his sleeves and began working through the maze of requests, updating what he could, fixing what made sense. But 3 sections stood out, parts that needed to be handled by another specialized team called Highpoint. Without their input, the changes couldn't go live. So he did what protocol demanded, opened a sub-ticket, sent it through, and let the process unfold. By the end of the day, Highpoint replied, they'd start their work, but they needed something first. New audio recordings for the main menu options. Simple enough, right? The technician drafted a polite response explaining that she'd need to send those recordings before anything could move forward. He thought it was clear. She, however, thought otherwise. The next morning, his inbox was full of messages, long, impatient ones. She accused him of dragging his feet, claimed the work was incomplete, and demanded to know why her call tree wasn't finished. He reread her messages twice, blinking in disbelief. Had she not read a single line of what he'd written? He replied again calmly, reminding her that 3 sections were waiting on her to provide the recordings. She didn't reply, not at first. But a few hours later, her response came through. A fresh complaint accusing him of incompetence and obstruction. The tone was sharp enough to cut glass. It would have been easy to snap back, but the technician didn't. He'd learned the hard way that people often mistake clarity for condescension. especially when frustration's already sitting on their chest. So he answered again, patient but firm, repeating what needed to be done. Still, no movement. The recordings never came. High Point sat idle, and the ticket hung there, open, unfinished, a symbol of stubbornness that had gone from irritation to absurdity. Days turned into a week. Every morning he logged in and saw the same case sitting at the top of his list, haunting him like an unending reminder that some problems don't want to be solved. Then one morning his manager called him into a brief meeting. "That call tree project still open?" the manager asked. The technician nodded, weary. "Yeah. We're waiting on her to send recordings." His manager raised a brow. She filed a second ticket. Same issue, same department. The technician exhaled through his nose, already expecting it. Of course she did. Together they reviewed both requests, side by side, identical down to the commas. It was almost impressive, the precision of her refusal to understand. "You'd think she'd realize this is the same job," the manager muttered. "I'll reach out to High Point myself." When the new day rolled in, High Point confirmed what the technician already knew. They couldn't finish anything without the main menu files. So once again, he wrote her. This time, he kept it painfully clear. "We are waiting on your audio files. Without them, the system cannot be completed." No emotion, no softness, just fact. He hit send and leaned back, half expecting the silence that followed. It was almost peaceful now. The calm that comes when you stop expecting logic to win. The next afternoon she called directly. Her voice, clipped and defensive, filled his headset. "You people keep delaying this project," she snapped. "Every time I check, nothing's changed." He could hear the tapping of her pen against the desk. "Ma'am," he said, voice steady. "I've explained this several times. The work cannot be finished until we receive the audio files. Once you send those, it'll be resolved." "So you're saying this is my fault?" she shot back. "No," he said, choosing his words carefully. "I'm saying it's your responsibility." The silence that followed was thick. Then without another word, she hung up. The call tree sat untouched another 2 days, then 3. On the 4th morning, the recordings finally arrived, short clips that sounded rushed, like she'd read the menu prompts in one long exhale. He didn't even care. He sent them to High Point and let them finish what she'd delayed. Within a day, the system was live. Problem solved. He closed the ticket quietly, no satisfaction, just relief. But karma wasn't done yet. A week later, his manager stopped by his desk again, a faint grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You'll like this," he said. "Guess who complained about the new menu layout?" The technician raised an eyebrow. "You're kidding." "Nope. Same woman. Says the menu is confusing. Wants it reverted to the old one." The technician chuckled dryly, shaking his head. "I'll let you handle that." "Already did," the manager said. "Told her it's recorded exactly to her own specifications. She didn't know she'd have to live with her own decisions." They both laughed, not cruelly, but knowingly. Some people, they realized, don't want help. They just want control, even if it means standing in their own way. When he finally clocked out that evening, the technician thought back on the whole mess. 2 weeks wasted, all because someone refused to listen. Yet it wasn't anger he felt, just quiet recognition. There's a kind of karma that doesn't punish loudly. It just hands you the full weight of your own choices and lets you carry it until you understand. Somewhere out there, that woman was probably still frustrated, still convinced the world had wronged her. But he knew the truth. The system worked exactly as she'd asked. Sometimes the universe doesn't give you what you need. It gives you exactly what you demand, just to show you how wrong you were to ask. It had been nearly a month since the case closed, but the technician still remembered her name. It stuck like a stubborn speck on clean glass, small, but impossible to ignore. He thought he'd left it behind with the other finished tickets, but one quiet afternoon, her name flashed again in his inbox. A new request, a fresh complaint. He almost laughed out loud. This time she wasn't calling about phone trees or recordings. She claimed her office's voicemail had stopped routing messages correctly and accused his team of sabotaging her department's communication system. The wording was sharper this time, her tone colder. He stared at the screen for a moment, debating whether to sigh or smile. Karma, it seemed, wasn't done circling back. When he opened the logs, the truth appeared in seconds. The issue came from a setting she'd changed herself. Out of impatience or pride, she'd decided to experiment with the new system, adjusting things she didn't understand. He could see it all clearly in the audit trail, timestamps, changes, and her user ID attached to every move. It wasn't sabotage. It was self-sabotage. He sat there for a moment, letting that sink in, feeling a mix of amusement and sadness. Most people never realize how often they create their own chaos. Still, he decided to respond kindly. He wrote back, explaining that the voicemail issue was caused by an internal configuration change. He even offered to fix it for her, no questions asked. Minutes later, her reply arrived. "I never made those changes. Your system must be wrong." He leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed. It was almost impressive, the precision of her denial. He'd seen that same pattern in dozens of clients. The refusal to admit error, the reflex to shift blame outward rather than look inward. So he let the evidence speak for itself. He attached the audit report, highlighted the logs, and sent it back with a brief note. "Please confirm if you'd like us to restore the previous settings." No emotion, no accusation, just the truth, waiting quietly on her screen. Hours passed with no reply. When his shift ended, he assumed that was the end of it. But the next morning, there it was, a long email written in the tone of someone who'd just realized the mirror won't lie back. "I appreciate your clarification," it began, her sentences unusually polite. "Please restore the settings." He did, quickly and cleanly, with no mention of the irony. After all, what was the point? Karma had already done its work. She'd seen her name beside the evidence, and for once there was no one else to blame. Sometimes that's punishment enough. In the days that followed, the story floated quietly through the department. Not as gossip, but as a kind of lesson passed between tired colleagues over half-empty coffee cups. "The woman who froze her own line," someone joked once, and the name stuck. It wasn't said cruelly, more like a nod to how the simplest truths take the longest to learn. The technician, for his part, never bragged about it, never mentioned her again. But something shifted in him after that. He began handling his calls differently, slower, calmer. Less about solving problems, more about understanding the people behind them. He realized most technical issues weren't really technical, they were human. A system breaks because someone rushes, assumes, or fears being wrong. And the fix isn't just code, it's patience. A month later, he received a surprising message from his manager. "You're being considered for lead tech," it said. "Your complaint resolution rate and feedback have been stellar. Keep it up." He didn't think much of it, but when the promotion came through, he felt a quiet satisfaction. Not pride exactly, just peace. He'd spent years being the guy people yelled at through a headset, absorbing their anger, translating it into solutions. Now he'd earned the one thing those calls rarely gave: respect. Meanwhile, the woman's name faded from the system. Her department was reassigned to a new manager who prioritized communication training over control. Ironically, the first policy he enforced was the one she had resisted most. All updates now required written confirmation from IT before being approved. It was her own trail of chaos that made that rule necessary. One afternoon, months later, as the technician reviewed archived logs, he stumbled upon one final note tied to her old case. It was from the new manager. "Former department head has resigned, moving to private sector." He stared at the message for a long time, thinking how endings often write themselves without our help. Maybe she'd learned something. Maybe not. But life, in its quiet way, had balanced the ledger. That evening, as he shut down his computer and stepped out into the cool air, he thought about how karma doesn't always come dressed as revenge. Sometimes it just rewires the circuit, resets the line, and gives everyone one more chance to learn what they keep ignoring. The phones in that office would ring again tomorrow. Someone else would get impatient. Someone else would blame the wrong person. And somewhere between all of it, another lesson would hum quietly in the background, waiting for the next stubborn heart to finally listen. Let's start the third story, one that begins with a routine request and ends with a truth no one expected to surface. It's a reminder that even behind the dull glow of office screens, people's choices still echo louder than the data they hide. Before we begin, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It keeps the stories alive, and your support helps these karmic lessons reach more ears that might just need them. Now, this one unfolds in the quiet corridors of a medical company's service desk, where every login holds the weight of patient records and every mistake can cost more than embarrassment. The technician on duty had seen all kinds of odd requests over the years, but that morning's message stood out immediately. The manager of a certain employee, User 1, had sent a formal request: block the user's account and generate a full audit log of everything they'd accessed during their recent vacation. Simple enough on paper. But requests like that always carried an invisible tension, the kind that hinted at something brewing beneath the surface. The technician followed protocol. First disable the account, then revoke any active login tokens. He pulled data from every corner of the company's network: Entra, Teams, the CRM, the device logs, building a picture of the employee's activity. He wasn't supposed to speculate, but curiosity always lingered. Still, the report looked clean. Nothing unusual, just daily access records, files reviewed, basic communications. He formatted it neatly and sent it off to the manager, ready to move on. But barely 30 minutes later, User 1 appeared at his desk, irritation written all over his face. "Hey, my account's locked out," he said, forcing a polite smile. "Can you unlock it?" The technician looked up, calm but cautious. "You'll need to speak to your manager," he said. "I can't override that." "Come on, man. I just need to finish some work." "Sorry," the technician replied, tone steady but final. "Your manager will have to handle it." That was when the color drained from the man's face. Not frustration, but fear. The kind that flickers through a person who suddenly realizes their secret might not be secret anymore. The technician didn't think much of it until minutes later, when the manager appeared at the far end of the hall, walking fast, her face tight with purpose. "Please come with me," she said to the employee, pointing toward a glass meeting room. "Leave your laptop with IT." The man obeyed, silent now. When the door shut and the blinds came down, the whole office seemed to hold its breath. 20 minutes later, two strangers stepped out of the elevator, plain clothes, no badges, but unmistakable authority. They walked straight to the technician's desk. "Are you the IT staff?" one asked. The technician nodded. "We were told you have a laptop for us," the other said. "User 1's." It took a heartbeat for him to realize what was happening. They weren't internal auditors, they were law enforcement. He handed over the machine, still warm from the man's hands, and watched as it disappeared into an evidence bag. One of the officers gave him a card with an email address. "Send all related access logs to this contact," the man said. "Everything you pulled today." The technician nodded, heart beating a little faster now. The officers thanked him and walked straight into the meeting room where muffled voices rose and fell behind the frosted glass. 20 minutes later, they re-emerged with User 1 in handcuffs. The sight hit like cold water. For years, he'd worked behind screens and tickets, solving digital problems. But this was human, messy, real. When the door closed behind them, the manager approached, her composure half frozen. "Thank you," she said quietly. "We couldn't have done this without your help." He nodded, still processing what he'd seen. "Can I ask, what did he do?" She hesitated, then said only, "We'll talk later." That evening, long after the office emptied, he sat at his desk, the empty chair where User 1 had stood that morning still visible from his corner. The building hummed its usual hum, machines cooling, lights dimming, But something felt off, like the air had shifted. He looked again at the audit report he'd pulled, the one that had seemed so ordinary hours earlier. Somewhere inside those logs was a story, not of technology, but of temptation. Days passed before the truth finally surfaced. Over lunch, the manager stopped by his cubicle, eyes tired but calm. "You deserve to know," she said. User 1 was trying to sell confidential company data, patient files, internal lists, reports. He thought he was dealing with buyers on the dark web. Turns out those buyers were actually a security firm working with law enforcement. They baited him, traced the data, and called us. The technician felt his chest tighten. Was any of it leaked? No, she said. He was caught before it left the system. He didn't even realize the files were encrypted, useless outside our CRM. She shook her head, half in disbelief. He was so sure he could get away with it. That night as he walked home, the city lights reflected off glass windows like countless silent eyes. He couldn't shake the thought. How easy it is for someone to cross a line when no one's watching. One click, one email, one secret folder named something harmless. And then, the world tilts. Karma didn't need to wait long this time. It caught up right where he stood, not with violence, but exposure. He wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was just a man who thought rules were for other people. The technician never saw him again, but the echo of that moment, the look on his face when he realized it was over, stayed. It was a look he'd seen before, in smaller ways. The sudden flash of guilt, the collapse of excuses. Every system he managed now felt different, not just lines of code but threads of trust, fragile and vital. Behind each login, a heartbeat. Behind each audit, a story waiting to be told. And somewhere in that web of wires and silence, karma kept its quiet watch, patient as ever. Now coming toward the fourth story. A reminder that some people cling so hard to what's no longer theirs, they mistake possession for justice. This one begins with a simple return and ends with a lesson about pride, rules, and the strange ways karma reminds us that letting go is also an act of dignity. Before we begin, take a second to like, comment, and subscribe. It keeps these stories alive and helps karma's ledger keep finding the moments where choice and consequence quietly meet. The call came mid-morning while the IT office was still settling into its rhythm. Another day, another lever. That's what they called former employees in the system. Their accounts were usually easy to deal with. Disable access, collect company equipment, confirm handoff. Routine. But when the technician saw the name flash across his dashboard, he could tell this one wasn't going to stay simple. The man had left 2 weeks ago, contract closed, laptop overdue. He'd ignored every reminder, every polite nudge from HR. Finally, someone from management warned him, if it's not returned by Friday, we'll escalate. Friday came, and sure enough, the man walked in, carrying the company laptop under his arm, eyes hard, expression unreadable. "Hey," he said flatly, placing it on the counter. "I can't access my files anymore, my account's locked." The technician looked up from his desk, calm and professional. "That's standard," he explained. "Once an employee leaves, the account is disabled for security." "Yeah, but I've got personal documents on that machine," the man said. "Family stuff, photos, my own projects. I need them back." The technician kept his tone even. "Unfortunately, the device and data are property of the company. If you had personal files saved, they'll need to be reviewed by HR before anything can be released." The man's jaw tensed. "That's not acceptable. I want them now." The air between them stiffened. The technician had handled hostility before, people blaming the system, the company, even him personally, but there was something different here. The man wasn't just angry, he was offended. "I worked there for 6 years, he said. "You think I'd steal something?" "It's not about that," the technician replied. "It's about policy." "Policy," the man repeated, spitting the word like it was poison. "That's always your excuse." He pushed the laptop closer. "Unlock it, right now." The technician sighed quietly. "I can't. You'll need to speak to HR." The man's voice rose sharp and brittle. "I'll take this up legally. You'll be hearing from my solicitor." The technician met his gaze, not combative, just steady. "That's your right," he said softly, "but I can't break company policy." The man grabbed the laptop, stormed off, and the door slammed behind him, leaving a low vibration in the glass. The technician immediately flagged the situation to HR and InfoSec, attaching a brief note. "Employee removed device after access denial. Possible data retention risk." Then he went back to work. It wasn't the first confrontation he'd seen, and it wouldn't be the last. But something about the man's tone lingered. A strange mix of entitlement and fear, like he wasn't just losing a machine, but something he believed he still deserved. That evening, as he packed his bag, the head of security passed by. "You had a scene earlier?" he asked. "Yeah," the technician replied. "Former employee, laptop issue." The security lead smirked faintly. "Don't worry, they all threaten lawyers. Then they remember the contract they signed." He was right. The next afternoon, the man returned. This time he wasn't shouting. He looked drained, the kind of tired that comes after realizing anger doesn't bend reality. 2 security officers flanked him just in case. Without a word, he placed the laptop back on the counter. "Here," he muttered. The technician nodded, took it gently, and checked the asset tag. Everything matched. "Thank you," he said. The man didn't respond. He just turned and walked out, leaving the echo of his footsteps fading down the hall. The technician opened the lid. The login screen glowed faintly, locked, untouched, but the device log told another story. Multiple failed attempts to bypass encryption, password resets, system access at odd hours. He frowned. The man had tried to break in. He'd wanted more than personal photos. There was no telling what he hoped to find. Company documents, maybe confidential data. But he hadn't succeeded. The system held. The policy had done its job. By the end of the day, HR sent a short message. "Thank you for following protocol. Situation resolved. Return secured." That was all. Clean. Closed. But the technician couldn't shake the feeling that behind that simple resolution, there'd been something deeper. A man trying to hold on to a part of his identity that no longer belonged to him. Karma didn't need to punish him. It had already done so by showing him the truth. Sometimes what we think is ours was only borrowed for a while. That night, the technician left the office with the city dimming around him, thinking about how strange it is. The way people fear losing control so much that they destroy peace just to feel in charge again. And somewhere in that quiet space between rules and resentment, Karma had quietly checked another name off the ledger. By Monday morning, the incident had already settled into office folklore. Another example of how entitlement and panic can look almost identical from a distance. The technician thought it was over, another line in the company's long log of awkward departures. But then came the email, a formal message from HR marked urgent. "We need you to bring that device to the compliance room," it said. Legal requested a deeper inspection. He grabbed the laptop and made his way downstairs, already suspecting why. The security team was waiting, serious faces, quiet tones, gloves on. They connected the machine to a secure terminal, watching as the system opened layer by layer. Within minutes, the screen filled with evidence of what they'd feared: data transfers, cloud links, and external drives connected after his termination date. The technician exhaled slow and low. "He tried to copy files," he said. The compliance officer nodded. "Looks like it. He might have deleted them too, but the logs don't lie." It wasn't dramatic, just sad. A man too proud to admit he was trying to take what didn't belong to him. HR handled the rest quietly. By the end of the week, the man was blacklisted from rehire. His supposed solicitor never materialized, and the company tightened its offboarding process even more. Karma had done what it always does, and it didn't scream. It adjusted the rules. For the technician, though, the story lingered in smaller ways. He started noticing how easily people blurred the lines between ownership and attachment. Files saved on work laptops that felt personal, email drafts that carried pieces of someone's life, goodbye messages never sent. Maybe that was why people like the ex-employee fought so hard, not for the data itself, but for the illusion of still belonging somewhere, still mattering. He couldn't blame them entirely. Losing a job wasn't just losing income, it was losing identity. And when identity lives on a hard drive, it's tempting to think holding the machine means holding on to the life that used it. A few days later, as he was closing tickets, an HR rep stopped by. "Thought you'd want to see this," she said, placing a sealed envelope on his desk. "He sent it to us, but mentioned you by name." Inside was a short note, handwritten, neat. "I shouldn't have spoken to you that way. I panicked. That laptop held more of me than I realized. I'm sorry for putting you in that position." There was no signature beyond his initials, but it was enough. The technician stared at the letter for a long time, then folded it quietly and slipped it into his drawer. In the following months, the story turned into an unspoken guideline during every offboarding briefing. Managers reminded staff to back up personal data before departure. IT repeated the policy about company property. But underneath the formality, there was a shared understanding. People leave fingerprints behind even in code. Sometimes those prints are harmless. Sometimes they burn. One Friday evening, as the technician powered down his system, he thought about the man again. How defiance had slowly turned into apology, and how the simplest rules often revealed the deepest lessons. Karma hadn't ruined his life. It had humbled him, stripped away his illusion of control and handed him a mirror. Maybe that was mercy in disguise. Outside, the streetlights were blinking awake, their reflections stretching across wet pavement. He zipped up his jacket and stepped into the cool night air, thinking about how strange it was that in a world of passwords and policies, the most fragile thing still wasn't data. It was pride. And pride, once cracked, doesn't vanish. It just teaches. Somewhere out there, a man who once refused to return a laptop was probably learning that lesson the quiet way, the way karma prefers. Now moving toward the fifth and final story, one that closes this chapter of Karma's ledger with a quiet reckoning. It's about legacy, secrets, and the weight of what we leave behind when we think no one's watching. Before we dive in, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories breathing, and every click helps this small corner of the internet keep shining a light on the choices that shape us. It began with a son cleaning out his father's study after the funeral. The old man had been a respected business director, sharp, stoic, admired. His company had sent flowers, his colleagues had sent condolences, and his family had sent their grief into silence. The son expected nothing more than old papers and fading photos, maybe a watch or two left behind. But what he found was something else entirely. A leather-bound ledger tucked in the back of a desk drawer, wrapped in a sheet of yellowed paper. It wasn't a financial record, not exactly. Each page was filled with names, dates, and handwritten notes. Short, clipped sentences. Some were kind. Helped her get promoted. Others were cold. Denied bonus. Dishonest in reports. And some, darker still. Knew, stayed silent. Let him fall. At first, the son didn't understand what he was looking at. But as he flipped through, a pattern formed. These weren't business accounts. They were moral ones. His father had been keeping track, not of money, but of people. Every wrong, every right, every choice that had crossed his desk. The ledger stretched back decades, chronicling betrayals, favors, cover-ups, and sacrifices. The handwriting shifted over the years, firmer in youth, shaky near the end, but the intent never wavered. His father had been judging the world around him, quietly playing arbiter of his own small universe. The son sat back, heart heavy. The man he'd known as calm and fair had been carrying something like a confession disguised as order. Maybe it had started as a tool, a way to remember who could be trusted. But over time it had become something else, a reckoning. And the strangest part wasn't what his father wrote about others. It was what he wrote about himself. On the final pages, the tone changed. Failed my wife in silence. punished one man too harshly. Watched good people break under rules I made. The handwriting faltered, ink blotting like small bruises. Then, one final line at the bottom of the page. If anyone finds this, make it right. The son didn't sleep that night. He reread the ledger cover to cover, tracing a lifetime of choices that painted his father not as hero or villain, but as something painfully human. A man trying to balance justice and pride until both bled into each other. But the line that haunted him most wasn't about guilt or confession. It was about the ones who'd been wronged. There were names in that book, employees, partners, even friends. People who had suffered quietly while his father maintained the illusion of fairness. And now, the weight of that truth sat in his hands. The next morning he visited the office his father had once led. The same walls still stood, the same polished floors reflecting a version of power that felt hollow now. He met with the current board, a mix of old faces and new. My father kept records, he said, placing the ledger on the table. You should see them. The room fell silent. They skimmed the first few pages, eyes widening, lips tightening, and for the first time the image of the man they revered began to shift. He wasn't just the brilliant director who built the company's foundation. He was also the man who'd buried small injustices under layers of professionalism. The board didn't know what to do. Some wanted to destroy it to protect his legacy. Others wanted to publish it to honor transparency. But the son said nothing. He just watched them wrestle with the same moral conflict that had clearly consumed his father for years. Maybe that was the lesson. No one gets to write a perfect ledger, not even those who believe they're keeping score for the greater good. That night he took the book home again. He didn't burn it. He didn't lock it away. He placed it on a shelf beside a family photo, somewhere visible but quiet. And before turning off the light, he wrote one final line on the last blank page. The debt has been seen. Because sometimes seeing is all that's needed to begin setting things right. He didn't tell anyone, but over the next few weeks, small things began to happen at the company. An employee who'd been overlooked for years got promoted, an old partner received public credit for a project long forgotten, and the culture shifted, almost imperceptibly, toward something gentler. No speeches, no press releases, just quiet corrections, karma moving through human hands, guided by those who finally chose to see instead of forget. And somewhere the old man's spirit, wherever it had gone, must have felt the balance settle, the ledger closing not with punishment, but with understanding. The ledger stayed on the shelf for months, a silent witness to the man's gradual reckoning with his father's shadow. Every few weeks, the son would pull it down and read a few lines, not out of obsession, but curiosity, like touching a scar to remember where the wound had once been. Each page carried a name, a moment, a decision that had left ripples through time. And as he read, something unexpected began to grow in him. Not anger, not pride, but empathy. His father hadn't written those notes out of malice. He'd written them out of fear. Fear that if he didn't hold the world accountable, no one else would. But in trying to balance everyone else's sins, he'd stopped forgiving his own. One evening, after another long day of work, the son found himself staring at the ledger again. The house was quiet. Rain tapped against the window. He flipped to the middle of the book, where the handwriting was strongest. The years when his father's influence had been at its peak. The notes were cold, exact, written with the confidence of someone certain of their own righteousness. But in the margins, faint pencil marks had been added later. Small corrections, apologies, even questions. Was I fair? Did I punish him or protect myself? She didn't deserve that. Those faint notes, softer, humbler, revealed the truth. His father had been haunted by his own moral bookkeeping long before the end. The ledger wasn't just about others, it was his confession. The son decided it shouldn't end in that house. The next morning he brought the ledger to his father's old company and requested a meeting with the new director, a quiet woman who'd once worked under his father decades ago. When he handed her the book, she didn't open it right away. She just ran her hand over the leather cover, the faint smell of ink and age rising from it. He was a hard man to work for, she said. but he taught me everything about accountability." Then she opened it, and her expression changed as she read. Her eyes moved slower with every page. When she finally closed it, she exhaled deeply. "You know," she said, "some of these names still work here. Some never forgave him." He nodded. "Maybe they don't need to forgive him," he said quietly. "Maybe they just need to see that he knew." The director closed the ledger carefully. "Then let's make sure they do." Over the next few weeks, she organized something unusual, an internal memorial disguised as a reflection session. No plaques, no photos, no speeches about success, just stories. People shared moments from their years under the old director, the times he'd pushed too hard, the moments he'd shown unexpected kindness, the quiet gestures that never made it into reports. For the first time, his leadership was seen as something human, not just powerful. When the son attended, he sat in the back, unseen, listening to strangers untangle his father's legacy with their words. By the end, he realized something his father never had. Judgment doesn't balance the world. Understanding does. After that, the ledger didn't go back on the shelf. It went into the company archives, sealed but preserved. Not as evidence, but as testimony. A reminder that even good men leave cracks behind, and that integrity isn't about being perfect. It's about trying to repair what you've broken once you realize it. Months later, the son stood in his father's old office, now occupied by someone else, and looked out over the city skyline. The light hit the glass just right, and for a brief second, he saw his reflection overlap with his father's framed photo still hanging on the far wall. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carries both grief and gratitude. "You did your best," he murmured. "And maybe that's all any of us can do." That night he began his own ledger, not one of judgment, but of gratitude. Each entry was a name and a note. People who'd helped, people who'd forgiven, people who'd shown kindness without expecting return. It wasn't a balance sheet. It was a mirror, turned toward light. As he wrote the final line for the day, "Every debt can end in mercy if seen in time," he closed the notebook and placed it by the window. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled new, like the world had been quietly washed clean. Somewhere beyond the night, the old director's ledger rested in its place, not erased, not forgotten, but finally understood. And in that understanding, karma, too, found its peace.